in the monastery, it happened to be on the renewal of temporary vows, for in the Carthusians one has to renew them. And it's first of all the period of 2 years plus the postulancy, then a period of 3 years, and then another period of 2 years again in simple vows, but passing from the novitiate to the fathers before one actually makes one's solemn vows. But it was that particular day of renewing them and going to the father's side, and it was the year 1982, the 25th of March, and I happened to notice that in this prayer group, this prayer book, which had been given by my mother, which had belonged to her own mother and grandmother, it's the Book of Common Prayer. I noticed that there is an entry on the 11th of October, and it says 82. That means 1882. That would have been her grandmother. It's quite clear, one can actually read. It's M.E. Lloyd, confirmed on the 11th of October 1882. So it was exactly 100 years earlier that that step had been made at the age of about 15 by somebody who had handed on the lamp of life. It is like a relay race. One hands on that from father to son, from daughter to daughter. And it had come down to us. Of course, it had passed eventually through 2 world wars, and indeed Uncle Willie, that would be my grandfather's brother, did not return from the war. He was blown up by a grenade. He had it more or less in his face, we know that. But my grandfather was not taken into the military side of the war, into the Navy, because he had a defect in one eye and spent therefore time in Wrexham making munitions, but it got him through the war alive, and therefore we existed. In the same way, in the Second World War, my father would have gone down to the Burma campaign. He was on the way there but got very ill with asthma. It got much worse, and he was recalled and worked for the army in Preston and so on. But those who did go down to the Burma campaign had a terrible, terrible time, and if they were caught, they had a really rough time. So that is Providence at least keeping one line of the family alive. But in the case of a person who opts to give his life then to the Lord in the form of monastic life, of course it all stops there. And when one looks at the family tree, one sees it going on both sides, and then it stops in this particular part of the family tree. It's given to the Lord. Going back to the first epistle to the Corinthians, that in the optic of eternity, it's not all important in that context, transmitting life, because it's all a question of what the Lord wants us to do with our brief existence on earth. It's all under his dominion, and he has authority to ask for that sacrifice also. For marriage ultimately is in that optic of creating new angels. It's all in view of heaven, glory, and the beatific vision. So the Lord is author of all that and has the right to record it. That is to say, no, I want your virginity for me. Now, in that wider context, there was that story which I heard from the family. What actually happened on that side of the family is quite intriguing. In those days, we're going back to the 1800s, life was quite fragile. Many people died for things which now they could be saved from. TB was a great one, of course, tuberculosis, but there were others. But also childbirth, or the consequences, was one of the big ones for a woman. And this particular great-grandmother, she had 2 children, but apparently when the third came, it was born, but it died, and she never got over it. And they said that she broke her heart eventually. She didn't actually get over that, whatever it was. We would call it different names nowadays, but in those days they said that she died of a broken heart. Anyway, she didn't survive that third child. And again, it was a going to the beyond after a very short innings, and I was quite moved by that, because looking at a photograph, or 2 photographs we had of her, she was a very beautiful young woman, and off she went there, as many, many others did, after a very short innings. And so I was reflecting on this prayer book which had been in her hands those 100 years earlier, and thinking how fragile our existence was, and these words came to me, which I can share now with you, because they are things which, flowing from the heart, help us to reflect on precisely the gift of life and also its fragility and the importance of not taking it lightly, as people do nowadays, e.g. the large number of young people even who throw it back in the eyes of their creator by suicide. It's a very ungrateful act, without saying anything else. And sometimes one actually gets people coming to one, e.g. in counsel or confession, wanting to get absolution before they commit suicide. It's actual nonsense. One has to talk through these things with them, indicating that this is actually a terrible, terrible way to opt for dying, because the last moment is actually spent against the will of the author who's giving life. It's just throwing it straight back at him. And they say that one can't get out of purgatory quicker than one would have been on earth. In other words, one carries on, but in a pace of purification. If there's any hope whatsoever of getting out of that, it's not a nice ride on the other side if one does that. I mean, it can be made shorter or whatever by people who are actually helping out on this side, but many people actually do end up in the beyond and cop on straight away that they've made a mistake only 1 second after doing it, because that clarity of vision becomes total after there's no distraction. In other words, whatever the means of committing suicide, they do wake up and they are in a state of existence. I mean, they can't do anything about the new state of existence that they've forced themselves into. So, of course, these things are never said, but it is the real issue, and they have to be at least thought about and be known about. Because I remember in school, we were quite surprised at the age of about 10 or so when we were told in school that actually suicide is a criminal act. Well, whatever the law says about it nowadays, it was something that we were given to understand, that it was the same as killing another person, killing ourselves, because God had given us life and only He had the right to take it away. So let's get this clear. It's not good to be beatifying people when they do this act, because it causes an awful lot of pain to those who are left on the other side, and it's not a heroic act at all. It's actually quite a cowardly act. And apparently those who end up on the other side in this state, they are actually given to understand and to feel and to see the pain that they are causing to those who are left behind. So it's not a solution of any problem whatsoever, it's just another set of problems which they are fabricating and forcing themselves into. And it's not fair either to accuse those left behind for what they and they alone are responsible for, and therefore it's not fair to use this lever of threatening suicide in order to get one's will in this life. By the way, this is linked with the abortion debate. It's no arm at all, it's no argument whatsoever, this one there. It's something that one can negotiate and dialogue about. Often it's enough to have a good, clear chat with the person who's vaguely thinking of suicide, and if there's any responsibility whatsoever, it's on that level there of not picking up things and not listening, because quite often things can be resolved by a good listening ear. So anyway, to get back to this,